Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country and around the globe. This is episode 100. We've made it to 100, the century mark. And I can't think of a more fitting guest to bring us into a new century of episodes, to bring us through the chaos of the last few months and years, and to help us figure out what comes next than a guy that I admire. I'm honored to call a friend. I've worked alongside for many years and was on my wish list at the top when I created this show. A true American treasure, a voice of reason, and maybe one of the most interesting guys in America, the great and powerful Sebastian Junger.
Thank you so much. That's quite an intro. I really appreciate it.
You deserve it, man. You deserve it. We've known each other for, over a decade now, I think, right?
Yep.
And been through some interesting shit. But let me start off with a question I've been asking everybody, Sebastian. Where are you and how are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm in New York City, Manhattan, Lower East Side, and we just had a big blizzard that pretty much paralyzed the city. So I was afraid that we'd seen the end of snow because we haven't had any snow in the city for 3 years or something like that. And I have two young children, and the idea that they would grow up without knowing what snow was so horrifying to me. And so now we've got plenty.
How has the pandemic been for you as a writer, as a young dad? I know you spend time in other places, but I do writing, obviously, and it's been simultaneously empowering, but also incredibly difficult. But you're one of I think one of the most important writers of our time. How's writing in the pandemic?
Well, as a new dad, it's really a childcare issue, and it's because of the pandemic, it's been really hard, as many parents know. It's been very hard to get safe, reliable childcare because contact is dangerous, and so I just finished writing a book a few months ago, and I compared it to writing a book with two young children in the house. I've compared it to writing a book while driving a car. I mean, basically you can grab a few seconds at a time, and you look down to your right and scribble a few words, and then you keep driving. And it's a little bit like that. And my wonderful wife has been just a hero, sort of like uh, blocking them a little bit from a couple of hours at a time so I can get the work done. But it's been really hard, as every family knows.
That's a really good way to put it. I think that's what it feels like for anybody trying to get something done, trying to, you pull over in a rest stop, try to knock something out real quick, and then you got to get back in traffic before your car gets towed, right? Like that's kind of the pandemic work experience. I want to ask you, man, because your kids are almost the same age as mine. Mine are 5 and almost 2, and we haven't seen each other in person in a long time. And we're going to get into a lot of issues. I want to get into all of your books and to Tribe and what's happening in this country right now. But on a very practical level or a personal level, how has being a dad changed you as a writer and as a person?
It's a good question. My writing is the same. My experience of life as a person has changed. Um, and it's made me, like the experience of war. Being a parent has made me way more emotional. Both things open you up for different reasons, but they open you up profoundly, and they open you up to both joy and sorrow. And so I would say, between my experiences covering wars overseas and then my experience as a parent now, I would say I'm finally a sort of fully emotionally complete human being with pretty good access to most parts of myself most of the time. And that was not true when I was young. And maybe for some good reasons, when you're sort of walled off, and it allows you to be highly, highly functional. But there's a point in your life where you don't want to just be functional. You also want to actually experience things. And that, to me, one of the amazing blessings of parenthood is that it's given me access to myself. And that's been a really profound thing for me.
That is profound. I love the way you break it down. I remember before my first son was born, General Petraeus, of all people, told me, I look forward to you having children because it'll smooth out some of your edges. And, you know, I didn't know what he meant at the time, but now I kind of know what he means, right? And then I remember hearing President Obama say something like parenthood is like having your heart outside of your body and having it exposed to everything that happens. We dropped my kid off today as his school reopened for the first time since November in person. And it was delayed by 2 days because of the snowstorm. And my wife and I dropped him off because we're still worried about him taking the bus. And she said, you know, I'm just worried about him going in because I can't help but think about Parkland, which is, you know, in about 2 weeks, the anniversary of Parkland. So I think your description of like feeling everything so much more is really, really insightful.
Yeah, and I was a climber for tree companies when I was young. I did all the like aerial work on a rope, the chainsaw, and then I was a war reporter. And so you get very good. I got very good at shutting down the experience of fear and sort of abstracting it. And, you know, I was very scared of heights when I was doing tree work, but I learned how to not think about it. Right. And as a parent, it's the opposite. Like, you can't keep the fears out. And it's not fears for myself, right? I mean, it's fears for what could happen to your child. And it's completely paralyzing. Like, I mean, or if you let it be, it's totally paralyzing. And I've just never known such vulnerability. Oh my God. Like it's really extraordinary, you know? And also, you know, children they can be difficult, they can get angry, they have tantrums, they have all kinds of stuff, right? And you have to have empathy because they're not doing things on purpose. They're going through these neurological changes, and some of them come out as a 15-minute temper tantrum, and that's them going through their changes. And it can't feel good to be a 3-year-old with a temper tantrum. That cannot feel good, right? And you have to remember to have some sympathy for their experience too, while you're creating boundaries. And it's just like, it's an extraordinary juggling act.
I'm so thankful to be talking to you about this because I want to talk about the politics of the day and the national security situation. But I also think that this is the kind of stuff that we need to talk more about as a country and kind of process together. I almost feel like, you know, we're processing trauma together in a way that we as folks who've been exposed to combat maybe processed in isolation. And you've been great about expanding many of these conversations or translating many of these conversations, but we're going through such a trauma as a country and these different phases of trauma and you know, maybe post-traumatic growth, right? This is a term that you've seen thrown around in the veterans and military and combat community, but I think it's a really important discussion about how we're feeling and thinking and processing, especially after having a president who didn't help us on that in any level.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think look, I mean, I'm happy to say that I didn't vote for Donald Trump and I've been a Democrat my whole life. But my heart in some ways, and I'm super alarmed by things that have been going on in this country. But if you look at Donald Trump as a damaged person, I mean, the thought has occurred to me, like, how much pain do you have to be in to cause this much pain? You know what I mean? Like, I've thought about that. Like, where is he in his sort of evolution as a human being? What happened in his childhood that has produced someone that even some Republicans will say, look, yeah, he's a pretty flawed person. And I'm like, what happened to that guy when he was 3? And I've thought about it now because I'm a parent. Like, what happened in that home? And I've tried to kind of open my heart up a little bit, as much as I abhorred his leadership, open my heart up a little bit to like what produced that, because it can't be fun being him either, frankly. And I think if we can all think in those terms about all of us, you know what I mean? If we all can think in those sort of empathic terms about everybody, we'll probably get further down the road faster.
I think you're right, and I hope you're right. And you and I have had, you know, a lot of these conversations over the last few years. I remember having drinks with you around a fire in LA and in the bar that you ran or were a part of in New York City. And one of the questions that we've always had in the show, since it's the 100th episode, I can't go having a conversation with you without asking, Sebastian Junger, what is your drink of choice?
Well, the truth, it's a 2-part answer. It used to be bourbon. And rye whiskey. And, I owned a bar, and when I walked in, I would order a double or I wouldn't even order it. They would just bring a double bourbon, right? And but I don't drink anymore. I haven't had a drink in like 5 or 6 years, something like that. And so, which I'm happy to talk about if you like. But the short answer is I don't drink anymore, so I don't have a favorite drink.
I actually would I'm trying to wrestle with that. I think like a lot of folks are. I mean, I went a couple months earlier this year without drinking at all, and I felt great. And I wasn't going cold turkey completely, but what was it like going through that? It seems like it was almost a part of my process as a writer, and maybe other things were a part of my process as a writer. And you owned a bar, so just I mean, any of that you want to expand upon? I mean, your bar was kind of like a clubhouse for a lot of thinkers, academics, a lot of veterans, right? And people who had been combat reporters. It was really an important place, I think, for us to gather pre-pandemic. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I mean, look, bars are a center of sociability in communities, and they serve a very, very healthy purpose. Um, I mean, my dad grew up in Spain, and Spanish culture, Irish culture, American culture. I mean, the pub. I mean, it's a super important part of any community. Um, and I've definitely enjoyed a drink or two in my life, and I'm glad I did. And I miss it to some degree. I mean, it was it can be a wonderful thing to do. And I will also say, as a writer, creatively, many articles or books when you figure out the structure of a book or an article, it's not a methodical process. There's a conceptual leap that has to happen where you can visualize the entire thing in this sort of organic way. And getting to that place in your mind, you don't necessarily get there by sitting at a desk and crunching numbers. You have to get there in a different way. And many times in my life, I have hit a brick wall with like how to write something. And I've taken a notebook and a pen and gone out to a bar and sat there and had a couple of drinks and just free associated. My book War, the structure of it, the tripartite structure of it, fear, killing, and love, the sort of three emotional experiences of combat, that came to me sitting in a bar in the Lower East Side, sort of trying to think in intuitive ways. So alcohol can be an enormously creative force in a person's life. I'm 59 right now. I got to the point in my 50s where, for a variety of reasons, I just thought I'm just not going to drink anymore. And now I'm so used to it. I forget that I don't drink because I don't even think it's just not part of my consciousness.
Mm. Can I ask you what bar in the Lower East Side you came up with the idea for War in? Do you remember?
I don't think it exists. I don't think it exists anymore. I just sort of wandered around. I was living in another part of the city, but I had used to live down here and in the Lower East Side, and I was just wandering around and I just stepped into a bar. I don't know which one it was. It was on I think it was on Rivington Street.
There's a lot of them down there. Like I wrote my book and was living in the Lower East Side at the time, and I felt like it should have got like an editing credit in my book or some kind of creative input credit, because it was a place where it was kind of like so rich with the history of and vibe of writing. But let me ask you another question, Sebastian. I've asked of all of our guests. When you go in the way back machine, when you were growing up, probably before you were doing tree work, Sebastian Junger, what was your very first car?
It was a Datsun station wagon. It was an awful green color. I mean, it was just one of these rattly cheap cars. But it went and went and went, and I had that for quite a long time.
Do you know what year it was and what color?
Well, I was born in 62, and I think I took it to college at 18. So that would have been what, 1980? Yeah.
And what color?
Oh, it was green. It was an awful green.
What kind of green? Like, what did it look like? You're a writer. You got to describe the green of your car.
I think it was trying to be a forest green, but it was a little more pukey than that.
I love it. Every time I ask that question, I'm surprised by the answer, almost every single time. Yeah, right. So in 100 episodes, we've had everything from a Humvee to a Model T to now your Datsun station wagon. So it's been a fun journey.
The thing about station wagons is I realized my best buddy is that you can sleep in the back of them, which means you can go anywhere. So we drove it all the way down into Mexico. We drove it up into the top of Nova Scotia and then took a ferry over to Newfoundland and hitchhiked around Newfoundland. We didn't bring, I remember that trip, we didn't bring sleeping bags. We were just idiots. We were young men, we were idiots. And so we slept inside a pile of hay. It was so cold. It was June in northern Newfoundland. And we piled up a bunch of hay and stuffed it underneath some plywood and slept behind a pub in St. John's, Newfoundland, it squirreled away in a bunch of hay. Like that's where my Datsun station wagon got us to.
You have an interesting life, man. And it's come out in all your work, and anybody who knows you. And I think, most folks maybe know you from first time they heard of you was probably The Perfect Storm, right? Or maybe I'm wrong. And then War was, I think, such an important work. And then Tribe later, and Restrepo, when you and I think first got into touch. You had the book Restrepo and then the film, right? Is that how the order went? And
yeah, I mean, the film was Restrepo, the book was War. They came out.
Right.
Yeah, they came out roughly together.
Thank you. And then I remember, seeing Restrepo. I remember where I saw it. And it was in New York at a screening. And that may have been the first time I met you and Tim. And at the time, and I think still now, for most folks who've been in Afghanistan, they say, if you want to understand Afghanistan, watch Restrepo. And, yeah. I still feel like that's probably the closest you can bring people to that experience. And you were recognized with an Oscar nomination, which I think was appropriate. And I think you should have won. And it was an interesting time. I don't know if it was the same year that Hurt Locker happened. Was it the same year or close to it?
It was a little bit afterwards.
But I remember the celebration around Hurt Locker and all these celebrity folks and Hollywood folks. And you took a couple Marines, I think, with you to the red carpet, right?
Airborne infantry. Right. They were in the unit that I was with.
Okay,
yeah.
So it was the guys from the it was 173rd.
173rd. Right? That's
yeah.
right.
So, but you took those guys. It was a real contrast. It was a time when we were trying to get people to even pay attention to Afghanistan and Iraq. You've unpacked a lot of these experiences, and you have insight into not just the veterans community and our national security, but the essence of war, how the country and the world understands war. I've framed up this battle we're in now as an insurgency with white nationalists and the Proud Boys, the attack on the Capitol. And I think we may be in for what in many ways is going to feel like another kind of long war. But right. Sebastian, you're maybe one of the most important public intellectuals on all of this. Can you break down, in your view, where are we as a country right now?
Well, thank you for the compliment. I mean, I hope my answer can live up to it. We're in a very, I mean, this is a cheap shortcut, but as a country, we're in an extremely confusing place. Some people are saying that patriotism consists of countering a fair election. There are people on the left who are saying that being a just person means segmenting society into its our different sort of like identities and populations. And I mean, all of that, I understand where it's coming from, but all of that I think is very damaging. I think the ultimate sort of sacred good of this society is that we are all free and we are all equal. And the way in which some people are disadvantaged has to be corrected. But the epitome of thought in this society are those two beautiful concepts. And I think I think what we had leadership that there's a lot of people in this country that believe things that are not true. And that's a huge problem, right? And it started with birtherism. And I think Donald Trump was under the First Amendment. It's his right to say that Barack Obama was not born in this country. Whatever. The GOP did not have to go along with it, right? But once you start introducing falsehoods like that and not contesting them, you can keep doing that, right? And so there was one falsehood after another. Climate change isn't happening. I remember back in 2005, 2006, someone was saying that the Iraq war was not going well, that the insurgency was gaining ground, right? And I think it was Karl Rove or maybe it was Dick Cheney. Somebody said, Well, that's journalists. They're in the I think you call it the reality-based community. You don't have to listen to them.
Hmm.
They're stuck in they're the reality-based community. And that was the beginning of this split between reality and a sort of a political presentation. And so now you've got people who think the election wasn't fair. You have people thinking completely outlandish things, but we got here. I don't know if we can get back, but we got here because of a small lie in 2015 about the commander-in-chief, Barack Obama. And keep in mind, the commander-in-chief during a war, right? Like imagine serving overseas and being told that your commander-in-chief is an imposter who is maybe trying to undermine the country. What does that? And the GOP never confronted that lie. And that to me was the thin end of the wedge. And now they're really struggling. I mean, forget about saving the country. They're trying to save their party. I'm not sure they can. I hope they can. But it started with that lie. And I believe, had they confronted that lie at the time, I don't think the GOP or the country would be where it is right now.
Sebastian, you wrote a piece for, I think it was National Review, where you talked about, a bit about the concept of tribe, right? And the pandemic had hit. Can you expand on, the idea of tribe, right? And how you think it has applied or been tested by the pandemic in particular, and now this new evolution of what I'm calling an insurgency. Other folks have other names for it, but
Yeah.
this internal threat that we're facing.
Yeah, I mean, humans are great in a crisis. They actually don't do so well when they're bored or when there's no challenges. I mean, it's actually not a great environment for humans. But so clearly our evolution had us confronting one challenge after another in our daily lives, and we really thrive on that. So you throw a hurricane at some people, you throw the Blitz in London at people, you put people in a platoon and send them into combat. Humans they always step up to the challenge. And one of the ways they step up is they stop thinking about themselves and they start thinking about the group. And the survival of the self depends on the survival of the group. So that's a completely logical and emotionally resonant choice to make. And when you identify with the group, is particularly in a situation of danger, there can be an almost ecstatic feeling. I mean, every religion tries to rid people of their sense of like enclosure, their sense of self. Like the religions try to open people up to the broader experience of being human, being part of something greater, and ultimately part of God. I'm an atheist, but it's my understanding of religion. Mm-hmm. So a crisis can produce that. You're part of this group, right? You don't matter. And that can be an ecstatic experience. And so what they found is that during the Blitz in London, psychiatric disorders went down during the bombings. Depression, suicide, all those things went down during the bombings and then back up when normalcy returned. The problem with the pandemic is that the thing you have to do to protect your community is to not be with them, right? Usually strength and protection and safety come from being with other people. Try going camping with 6 people, you'll sleep great at night. Go camping alone by yourself in the woods, you will not sleep great at night, right? That's the power of the multitude. And the tragedy of the pandemic is that the greatest act of affiliation we can have for our community to protect them and ourselves is to actually not be with them. It's completely unhuman. And yet it must be done. And I think that has psychologically destabilized the country enormously, understandably. And then along came a lot of conspiracy theories, along came the election. We all knew this turmoil was coming. I think we've all known it for several years, that if Donald Trump lost the election, it was going to be a bumpy ride. I think we all knew that. And now here we are. It is a bumpy ride. I think we're going to survive. But my God, I mean, how many things can you pile on one country at once? I think it's not a coincidence. I think they are triggering each other, in fact.
Sebastian, can you've been to, I don't know how many war zones. You've seen various evolutions of combat and war and trauma. Can you maybe go deeper into January 6th
Yeah.
and what's happened since. You've even created a nonprofit risk, right, to help journalists be prepared for medical emergencies in a combat environment, right? Help me if I mischaracterize that, but I thought it was really forward thinking. But we're watching January 6th and we're seeing what unfolds next. You've seen different parts of this story before, but maybe never assembled like this. What are you seeing on January 6th and afterward and ahead?
Yeah, I mean, and first of all, let me just say that, I mean, I studied anthropology in college. There's a lot of evidence, a lot of research that about 50% of our political belief has genetic origins. In other words, there is DNA associated with conservatism and liberalism. And so both ways of thinking about the world and about our community are clearly adaptive, helped our ancestors survive. About 50% of the variance is genetic, 50% is learning. If you grew up in a liberal conservative household, you're likely to adopt those norms. So let me just say, even though I'm a Democrat, I absolutely believe that both parties, both ways of thinking are healthy and good and essential to running a balanced and healthy society. I just want to get that out there. What's not healthy is the idea that you can achieve political ends through violence. So if you do that, you are a terrorist, right? If you use violence to achieve a political end, you are a terrorist. If you use violence to achieve a political end and you're associated with the government, you're a fascist, right? Those are the two words, right? Though neither thing is democracy, right? And there is a rather bright line there. If you think the election was, quote, stolen, in a democracy, conflicts are adjudicated by the courts. And if the state charges you with dealing drugs and the court convicts you, you are a convicted drug dealer, whether you like it or not. That's just how it works. Well, likewise, with this recent election, the courts overwhelmingly upheld the results, as did many Republican figures in the Trump administration. That's just what happened, right? And if you resort to violence to change the outcome, you're a fascist. And Trump, he checks just about every box for fascism. I mean, my father's a refugee from two wars. He's passed away, but he was born in 1923. He lived in Spain when he was young. He fled Madrid when the fascists came in under Franco. Went to Paris. They fled Paris when the Nazis came in. He came to this country, and he lived his whole life here. Fascism is the belief that basically you can unite all of the levers of government under one party, under one person, and everything within the government is at the disposal of that person. The intelligence services, the security, the Justice Department, like all of those things, their job is to bolster the power of this one person. That is fascism. And it's associated with a huge amount of violence. And what I saw on January, to get back to your question, what I saw on January 6th was the incredibly disorganized, inept, wrong-minded beginnings of a group of people thinking that they can change an outcome with violence and intimidation. That's fascism. That's not America. It's not democracy. It's certainly not freedom. And I think it has to be dealt with in a very, very direct way. I think the government's trying. I think the GOP can save itself by calling that January 6th what it was, which is a fascist attack on our freedom.
And simultaneously, you've got Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney trying to fight from one side, and then you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene on the other, right? And Matt Gaetz, and there's this internal political conflict coming or happening and unfolding. But you said something I thought that was really important. You said the beginnings of. So I and Malcolm Nance and others we've had on this show have said this. That was not an event. This is kind of a new normal. Can you talk about what you see, knowing, probably have an insight into what the Oath Keepers are like, what other elements of this country are like? You're I don't know, a guy that's been more uptown and downtown across America than you. If this is the beginning, what comes next? What does it look like? And you mentioned it a little bit, but what do we do to stop it or fight
Right.
it?
Well, yeah. What I would say is in Spain in the 1930s, the reason the fascists won and democracy lost was because the military sided with Franco. The military sided with the fascists, right? As did the Catholic Church. And between the church and the military and the sort of the industrial power keepers in that country, it was an unstoppable force, and they took over the country and ruled it as a fascist state for decades. In this country, thank God, the military is neutral. It's professionally neutral, right? I mean, it's ingrained. Its neutrality is ingrained, and once in a while you get someone who in the military that sort of follows their personal political instincts, but for the most part, it's completely neutral. So, at the end of the day, I don't think militarily this fascism in America is going to go anywhere. I don't think that Oath Keepers. I mean, it was amazingly inept that January 6th. I mean, my God, if that, a disproportionate number of those people were ex-military, if that's their best effort, good God, we're going to be fine, because that was pathetic, right? But it was dangerous, and it was demoralizing and disheartening. And, I think you have 30% of the Republican voters believe the lies of QAnon. 70% think that the election was stolen. If you have an entire party that believes things that just are demonstrably not true, what you have is a crisis in the GOP. I think the rest of the country, which has the military behind it and rationality behind it, I think the rest of the country is going to sort of be okay. But I am sort of wondering what the GOP is going to do with itself. And we're finding out right now. I mean, the sort of war between Green and Cheney, it's splitting the party in half. And again, I think it started with that stupid lie about where Barack Obama was born. And I think had the GOP confronted that lie at the time, they would not be in this predicament. But here they are. And the sooner they start telling the truth, the sooner they're going to be, the truth shall set you free, right? I mean, that's anyone who's gone to church knows that sentence, right? So go for it, guys. The truth will set you free. Today is the time to start.
So there are these epic choices, right? You've got to pick between Biden and Trump, right? And then we have that choice, and the Trump group becomes maybe a bit smaller, right? Then within that, or the Republicans become a bit smaller. Then it becomes, okay, you got to choose between Kinzinger and Green, right? And then the Green crew may keep getting smaller, but may also intensify and get more calcified and more militant and more desperate and more extreme. And that in my experience has been how things tend to unfold. And this idea that Trump was just going to go to Mar-a-Lago and shut up and play golf is a fantasy. Like, even if he's gone, just like in Iraq after Saddam, you have Muqtada al-Assad, or you have other evolutions of this ideology that will continue. And one of the things we've explored in the show, Sebastian, is anger. Right. Yeah. And we've tried to get ahead of this curve a long time ago and say people are angry about a lot of things: school shootings, snow, taxes, a lot of things that maybe they're right to be angry about. That's a part of this country. But what you do with it is the key. Right. And we try to turn it into positive impact. And I'm going to explore that more in the next 100 or 200 episodes. But as we come to episode 100, the question we've asked everyone is, Sebastian Junger, what makes you angry?
It's a good question. It makes me extremely angry when people lie for their own benefit, when people lie in order to achieve personal power, when people lie knowing it will cost other people something, but they themselves will benefit. That makes me enormously angry. And here I'm going to put on my completely bipartisan hat. Both sides do it. The right wing does it for sure. We're seeing sort of the last 4 years, we saw a flagrant example of it. But the left wing does it as well. And it happens in academia, in the universities. This sort of misrepresenting reality for a kind of political gain, I think, is the most loathsome thing, and it makes me absolutely furious.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like you could write an entire book on the concept of a lot of concepts, but anger, right? And where that manifests itself in America. Let me ask you this, because a lot of your work is about maybe giving voice and beautiful description to people who are living hard lives or having hard times, or working people, however we want to categorize it, right? Men and women, whether they're working on a boat or they're in Afghanistan. So you have a really special understanding of the fabric of this country. You're a Democrat. A lot of folks are Democrat or Republican by default. We've explored a lot the idea of alternative options, and I don't mean QAnon. I mean, unaffiliated, right? What do you see in the middle, or political middle, or maybe outside of the boxes, as we see potentially third-party options and other places to expand? Knowing all these communities that you do, what do you see out there politically that could come together, or that people might respond to, that maybe aren't choice A or B?
Well, I think if the GOP splits, it's going to be hard for them to win elections. Obviously, I mean, that's just basic math, and I think they're headed for that. So, and what really I dislike is the idea that the Democrats, who I'm a Democrat for some good reasons, but we can also be unbelievably wrong-minded and inept. And the idea that the Democrats could, by default, wind up sort of running the country because the GOP, because of its own internal contradictions and lies, has split down the middle, that's a disaster for everybody. I mean, I want a healthy GOP. I don't want the Democrats to run everything. I want a healthy GOP so that you have a fair contest of ideas. So that to me, that to me is a ghastly prospect. Ghastlier would be Donald Trump's way of doing things continuing. That to me is even worse. But I don't want the Democrats to call the shots for the next 20 years because the GOP is split down the middle. And I think, like, I was just reading an article today about the Atlantic Monthly did an analysis of the 193 people who were arrested for the Capitol, the attack on the Capitol. They were disproportionately older. They were not a young crowd, disproportionately older, obviously almost exclusively white, disproportionately older, many of them business owners. These are not people who were hurting, right? These are not the unemployed masses, right? These are business owners, people with good jobs. They were from blue states as well as red states, but they were not desperate people, right? So I think we have to understand this political moment not as a kind of an uprising of the desperate unemployed people. I mean, look, there were a lot of labor riots in 19-teens, 1920s. Those really were desperate people, right? Who were, they were incredibly harsh working conditions, and people rose up and a lot of laws got changed. That's not what the Capitol riot was. And so I think we have to understand this more in terms of a manipulation by very powerful, influential people, rather than as a sort of desperate actions of people that had no recourse. It was a manipulation, and a manipulation by people who knew it wasn't true. What they were saying was not true. That to me is what's really sickening.
Yeah.
Like, the leaders of this know it wasn't true, and they did it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. There's been a lot of comparisons to, what would have happened if the Black Lives Matter protesters did this, right? That's the easy thing I think that the media is covering, but they have a loss of a sense of history. They forget the bonus march, right? They forget what happened when a group of veterans marched on Washington and were crushed and killed by their own military. Like, that happened outside the Capitol, in the cap, but not in the building, right? Yeah. Those guys were organized, were veterans, had, real, I think, reasonable gripes about what was going on. And they faced a much more harsh response. And we've seen that, throughout American history in different ways. But you're a great student of history. Can you talk about what's the piece of our own history, Sebastian, that we're maybe not thinking enough about now? And if it's a good pivot into your next book, what you're working on and what you're exploring going forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, history is so complex, and you can pick almost any moment and learn and take lessons from it. So I hesitate to sort of dub one thing in the American experience being more illuminating. But what I will say, I think generally, is that until our quite recent past, the American experience has been one of enormous hardship. I mean, a majority of households didn't even have electricity until the late 1940s, right? During the Dust Bowl out west, schoolhouses were left open and unlocked because there were so many people on the move, walking from town to town, whole families walking from town to town, looking for refuge, looking for work, that it was a custom, not a law, but a custom to leave the schoolhouses unlocked so that they could take refuge in the schools at night, because there was always also a well that they get water from. That was within my parents' generation, right? The history of the Pennsylvania frontier, which my book, Freedom, partly focused on, oh my God, was it bloody and brutal. I mean, hardships. I mean, we look at the refugees from the Syrian civil war and things like that, like, oh my God, those poor people, how did they do it? Honestly, that's nothing compared to what the pioneers were doing in Pennsylvania, and also what some of the native tribes went through, of course. But I think we've industrialized and technologized our society to the point where survival is almost physical survival is pretty much guaranteed. And it's allowed us to forget how marginal and how rough and how just arduous and hard the experience of most Americans has been for most of our history. And that, to me, you forget that, and I think one of the greatest losses a person can experience is to lose their appreciation for how fortunate they are, whatever that may be. And I think as a nation, we're sort of forgetting that. If you look at our history, it'll occur to you like, oh my God, are we lucky to be right here, right now? Like we really pulled drew the right card here.
I'm so glad I got you on the show right now. I really, man, this is like, it's a perfect time to have you here. Do you want to talk any more about what your next project is specifically, or when folks can look for? I'm going to have you back on when it comes out, but even, if you don't want to get specific, the ideas you're thinking about and exploring beyond what you've already covered.
Yeah, sure. I'll do it briefly. It's a short book called Freedom, about the history of freedom. It's a follow-on to Tribe. Two of the primary human values around the world are community and freedom. And Tribe is about community, obviously. I wanted to tackle freedom. And as I broke it down, I realized that throughout history, freedom has come from three sources. And by the way, in my book, I don't discuss anything contemporary. I don't discuss really anything after the 1919 steel mill strikes around Pittsburgh. That's about the last thing that I touch in any depth in my book. But our freedom comes from three sources. Societies, groups of people have maintained their freedom by being very mobile. So, for example, the Apache were free of government, of white control for almost 400 years because they were poor and they were mobile. The Pueblo societies in the Southwest got rolled up by the Spanish almost overnight. They were wealthy, but they were tied to their towns, and they just got destroyed almost immediately. The Apache, who were poor and mobile, remained free until the 1880s. Right? My grandmother was born in 1900. I mean, they almost made it to within my grandmother's lifetime. And they did that because they were mobile. The U.S. cavalry just could not catch them. In fact, they were so good at evading the military that papers have been written comparing the Apache to the Taliban, because of course the Taliban have outrun and outwitted the U.S. military because they're mobile. Right, that was one of their main assets. So, but if you can't outrun your oppressor, you're going to have to outfight them. And one of the unique things about humans, both at the individual level and at the group level, is that the smaller entity, the smaller individual or the smaller group has a perfectly good chance of beating the larger individuals. Like in chimpanzees and every other animal species, the largest male sort of wins the fight, right? That's not true with humans. And for some very complex physiological reasons that I go into, but it's also not true for insurgencies versus larger militaries. If the largest male or the largest group always won, there would be no freedom. And effectively, there would be top-down hierarchies, just like chimpanzee society. The world would be run by fascist megastates where no rebellion or insurrection could survive. That's not what human history is, thank God. And then finally, if you can't outrun them and you can't outfight them, you're going to have to outthink them. That's what the Irish did against the English after the uprising in 1916. That's what the labor movement has done in this country, the civil rights movement. It's been a matter of enormous physical fortitude and courage, but also profound thought. And so my book is divided into running, fighting, and thinking.
I love it. I can't, and we all need more freedom right now. And I think with this, I think this book is going to be coming at a really important time. Everything you do is important and timely, but also you've been kind of shepherding us through some really challenging times in this country before, and I think the country is going to need you even more ahead. You've also been through a lot of shit. Like, you know, you've covered a lot of really hard stuff. You've been through a lot of hard stuff, and you still stay positive, and you inspire others, and you give back. So I want to ask you, Sebastian, a question I also ask of all of our guests. Sebastian Junger, what makes you happy?
I mean, honestly, I'm at my happiest when I'm doing something, when I'm succeeding at doing something I didn't think I could do. And when I'm with other people that I love, or even people I feel connected to. I mean, those two things, like, to me, they're almost like drugs. They make me feel so good. And if I can get them together, you know, I think that's what a lot of guys experience in combat. They're with guys, they're with other people they care about, and they're doing something that they think they might not be able to do, but they're doing it, they're pulling it off. It is totally intoxicating. But of course, you don't need combat for those experiences. They happen every day in people's lives. They're beautiful, and those are the things I'm continually searching for.
Amazing. Is there anything you recently learned how to do that you didn't think you could do? Like, I could see you being like secretly a master at yo-yo or like origami or so. Is it?
I started boxing a few years ago, and I'm not even sure I'd call myself decent, but I'm a hard-working boxer. And I've always wanted to learn accordion, and so I started playing accordion. And I sort of taught myself. That is one hard instrument, by the way. Like, but I'm really proud of myself. Like, I'm pretty decent now, and I did it myself. And it's one of the joys of my day is picking up my accordion and playing.
That is amazing. Like, I did not expect that. My grandmother actually played accordion. And then my mother was taught it as a child. It was like something that was in the Hungarian community, I guess. And somehow my mother, you know, ended up with an accordion in her hand at some point. And it is incredibly difficult, and increasingly rare instrument in our time. Right?
Yeah. I mean, you play the melody with your right hand, and you need to run the bass line with your left hand. So you have to have this left hand, right hand independence, which for the aging male brain, let me tell you, that's a tough ask, but I'm getting it. Like, it's and I think it's probably pretty good for you.
I love it. All right. Well, I've got to quickly give you some gifts virtually. We can't do this in person, but you know, we're going to send you some Angry Americans gear, which is going to be on sale for the next couple of weeks. Some super comfortable Tommy John lounge pants, which you can wear when you're writing or playing your accordion. You got a bottle of Uncle Nearest whiskey that you can give to someone else.
Nice. Look at that. Awesome.
Great story, great mission. If you and Jeffrey Wright haven't done something together, I feel like we should make that happen, because he introduced us to that. And you guys, if you don't know each other, you need to hang out. There's some powerful shit will come out of it.
I'd love to.
And then the question that started way back is our peeps question. Easter is again coming soon, but it's totally independent of that. There are 3 colors of peeps, Sebastian: yellow, pink, and blue. Which color would you choose and why?
I'm not sure what peeps are. Is that?
Wow. Okay, I got the yellow marshmallow candies from
Oh,
Easter.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Um, uh,
Yellow, pink, or blue?
Yellow, pink, or blue. Oh God, I think I'd pick yellow because they're not pink and blue, and pink and blue seems like that's male and female, and I don't want to. I don't know. I feel I feel like there's no no good answer.
There's
I'll
no
go with
wrong answer.
I'll,
There's no
I'll go
wrong answer.
I'll go with yellow peeps.
There you go. There's no wrong answer. And everything that you say, especially right now, is exceptionally valuable. I really mean that. I mean, I want America to hear from you every day. If if you want to start a daily radio show or podcast, I'm all in to help in any way I can, because you've helped me make sense of the last few decades, and I know you'll help me make sense and learn more about myself and our country and our community. So I am just incredibly grateful for your leadership and your sacrifice and your fortitude, and your talent. You don't have the bar anymore, but maybe when this changes, we can all get together and box and play accordion and eat some peeps.
Okay. Awesome. I look forward to it, man.
All right.
Thank you.
The great Sebastian Junger, thank you for all you do. Look for his new book coming up. Read and watch everything he's ever done. He's truly an inspiring and important and iconic American. Thank you, my friend. Stay vigilant. Stay frosty.
Thank you. Take care.